the novel is on the Spanish Civil War, titled The World Between Us. And what happened was last year, Rosen mentioned that he bumped into Lydia and that Lydia was writing about the Spanish Civil War at that particular point. And I thought that's quite exciting. I'll nab her for this year's Arts Week, and she can give us a reading, which she's kindly agreed to do. What I wanted her to do is give us a reading, but also give us all a chance to think about and discuss the challenges of writing about such a topic as war for young readers. But also in writing about war, the way she has included romance as well and politics in the form of idealism. In relation to this work and the work that I do in my department, we tend to look at the Civil War from a different perspective, in the sense that at the moment the current debate in Spain on the Civil War is about historical memory and about the ways in which current generations, or a range of generations, are coming to terms with the trauma of finally being able to talk about the Civil War in very specific ways, in ways that allow a sort of sense of recovering a form of public memory, or negotiating a public memory of the Civil War in democracy, which is quite a thorny and difficult subject. What I find particularly interesting about what Lydia has done is that she is responding to a different sense of urgency in relation to her wanting to write about the Civil War, which is linked to the fact that there are young people in this country who are unaware of the history of the Civil War and Britain's involvement in it. And so this writing A World Between Us has given Lydia a chance to work on this topic, particularly at a time when young students are taking up learning the Spanish language. This gives them a chance also to try and appreciate a different perspective on the Spanish Civil War. So I'd like to welcome Lydia and ask her to do a reading and talk about the book.
I'm going to do a reading from, well, it's about a third of the way through, and the book's the interweaving story of three characters, all of whom leave Britain for Spain for different reasons. The first is an idealistic young man from the East End, a young Jewish man called Nat, who is in the Young Communist League, and he joins the International Brigades. It's in a sense, if you know about the Spanish Civil War, it's a fairly standard story, but if you don't, it's still incredibly exciting, because there were, in fact, the latest estimates of 4,000. The MI5 files last year revealed up to the numbers of people who came from the British Isles and went to Spain, from the 2,500 that was supposed to be to nearly 4,000, and that was a total. There were a total of 35,000 people came to Spain from 53 different countries, and they were rallying to the call of democracy as they saw it. And sorry, I say as they saw it only because of the American version of democracy now that makes talking about the Spanish Civil War in terms of defending democracy even more complicated, which was another reason why I wanted to do the book. But the part I'm going to read from, so we have Nat, then we have Felix, who's a young nurse who he meets at the beginning of the book, by chance, who is swept away both by him and by the ideals that he's committed to. And then a third character, George, who is a family friend who sets off in pursuit of Felix to bring her home, and is himself transformed by the experience of being a journalist in Spain. So I'm afraid we won't be hearing from George, but this is a section just after the first battle that Nat is involved in, which was a desperate battle for the British battalion. They were used as shock troops and fairly decimated. And Felix has been working in one of the improvised hospitals near the front line. And two things have just happened. One, a delivery of blood from the blood bank from Madrid, the first delivery of bottled blood they've had, and also the first cases from the British battalion. So everybody wants to know what's happening. Can you cut down a vein? In theory, if my hands could just keep still. The British battalion. Here, over here, no more space in triage. John took her to a small side room off the main hall. It was piled with furniture and boxes cleared from elsewhere, but there was just enough floor space for a blood-soaked mattress. A man lay under a blanket. It wasn't Nat. This patient was broader, much older, as white as paper. Felix knelt and felt his pulse. Not much there. Just you wait, said John, I'll show you. They set up the transfusion together, opening their patient at the ankle. The vein was close to collapse, but they decided it would do under the circumstances. We're aiming at about 70 cc a minute, give or take. After a while, John left Felix, holding up the funnel, dripping citrated blood into the rubber tubing from a bottle that once contained wine. It was almost peaceful here, after the operating theatre's frenzy. Felix's raised arm began to sway, and she forced her eyes open. Was it the light filtering through the window? Red sun in the morning, she fretted. Was he getting some colour back in his face? Yes, his lips were definitely less blue. Her pocket watch was resting on the blanket so that she could see it clearly. It fell to the floor with a clatter as her patient shifted his legs slightly. He let out a long sigh. You're in safe hands now, murmured Felix, unsure if he'd hear. But his eyes opened and looked at her. The blood was nearly gone. She waited for the last drops to make their journey, removed the cannula and bound up his ankle. She felt his pulse again, much stronger. There, that's better.
Well, I should say so.
The rush of recognition made tears prick in her eyes. A London voice, croaky but clear enough, East End, she reckoned.
Are they going to operate?
He continued. I expect so, she replied, fighting for calm. You ought to be up to it very soon.
Where did they get me?
Felix made a bit of a show of checking his casualty card, as if the wound was so slight you might not notice it. Bernard Solomon, she noted. Lower back. He grimaced.
We weren't even in retreat. Just my luck. Oh, it was bloody mayhem, I tell you.
He fell silent, then looked at her.
You got a moment, love?
All the time in the world.
Dying for a cigarette. Could you help me?
He couldn't seem to move his arms, but he indicated his breast pocket with his eyes. Felix remembered what Kitty had told Dolores. Never leave a dying man. She hadn't thought to wonder how you'd know. Anyway, this blood should do the trick. He'd be in theatre soon. They'd get him back on his feet. Felix knelt across the man and gently drew out a tobacco pouch. Opening it, she caught a smell she used to know. That's not Spanish tobacco, is it?
No, Will's. My last Ramon. Been saving it for a special occasion. I reckon this counts, don't you?
Felix couldn't confess now that she'd never rolled a cigarette in her life before. Most of the other English volunteers smoked whenever they could. She'd watched Charlie's ritual rolling, and she did her best to copy it now with this man's sole remaining paper. After several attempts, she thought she'd got it tight enough. Her mouth was very dry, but she managed to find just enough spit to stick it down. A few strands of stray tobacco hung from the end. Here you are. His lips parted obediently, cracking a slight crust of saliva that had formed at one corner. She put the cigarette in place, then found his lighter. The flame glowed blue. The man drew deeply, and a couple of tears came from nowhere and edged down the sides of his face, finding the creases and wrinkles. She took the cigarette away for a moment so he could exhale, and then let her hand rest on his.
Oh, I don't know how many we lost. Half the company, it felt.
He was finding it harder and harder to talk, but Felix couldn't stop him.
Half the bleeding battalion gone. I should think. Wouldn't be here myself if it weren't for... Oh, we were stuck, you see, really stuck on a hill. So bare. We couldn't see how we'd ever get back. Back to the sunken road, just me and a pal. Nice lad. Spirited. Clever, you know. About your age. Been with him since Albacete. Oh, proper mensch. Come back from the same neck of the woods as me. Yeah, as a matter of fact.
Did he? The thud of her heart grew faster. She remembered the feel of Nat's lips and the sound of his breathing.
Stayed with me till the stretcher come. He did, yeah. Long way, believe me. And he didn't have to. You should go, I told him. Did he listen to me? Hope he's doing all right now. No, I reckon he's the lucky time. He'll be all right, I reckon. Please God.
He began to ramble. Felix didn't really know what he was saying, but she nodded and said yes and oh no, and went on stroking his hand. It didn't seem right to ask the questions she wanted to. He talked about the moon, how thin and wispy it had been. Gradually his speech petered out. Felix felt his pulse. Then his eyes opened again.
That blood you give me did me a world of good. Got any more where that come from?
Before she could answer, Bernie's eyes closed. The last breath left his blood-filled lungs.